in camp, what's your approach on periodization, and how does the nutrition alter that throughout the different times in camp?
Well, that's a wonderful question because they're so intertwined. And I think Phil, a lot of times we, and I don't try to be a control freak because I'm not saying I know everything. I just try to learn a little bit about, because everything's connected. Regarding setting up a periodization model, right? The first thing in order to set up a periodization model is I got to get the fighter's schedule, because I need to know their training sessions. How many times per day? 3 sessions a day. Jits here, striking pads here on Monday. And then I got to try to first take the models that we know. I take the strength training protocols we know and somehow systematically fit them into a radically difficult training schedule to begin with. So the first thing I will do before putting even a periodization model together is try to, and I say try because, boy, you know this, Phil, they're all mapped. Get their entire 8-week training schedule, when they're doing A, when they're doing B. Now, just quickly with the nutrition tie-in, that's why sometimes it's really difficult. If you got a nutritionist over here, this coach over here, well, the nutritionist doesn't know their training schedule, doesn't watch them, doesn't see how many times a day they're training, doesn't know it, so they may not feed them properly. So I try to put it all together. Regarding the periodization model, sometimes it has to be modified because, as you know, you get a guy who comes in 6 weeks into the camp and now wants to do all types of training that should have been done at week 12 before the fight.
Exactly. Yep.
So we have this wonderful periodization model where we could do various blocks, and we can do strength, and we can, and you break this down well because I watch you. We can do a strength endurance, strength speed. We can do all the different phases. We can do hypertrophy phase if the fighter needs it. All these various blocks, but the difficulty that we really run into is half the time these guys show up a little bit late and you have to modify it. Then you may be in the middle of a strength phase, a pure strength phase, maybe 10, 12 weeks out. It's a young fighter. They're 21. They don't have a tremendous history of strength training. So you really need that foundational strength. And I'm ready to do some strength work with them, and they come in, and now heel hooked them, and that throws them. So I think flexibility.
This is crazy.
Am I right? Or do you run into that?
Yeah, definitely.
Just me. So.
Hello.
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay.
Jason.
Yeah. I was reading an interview you did for International Society of Sports Nutrition, and you were explaining all the preparation you do beforehand in regards to your fighters. For example, talking to their coaches and the other disciplines to see what they're looking for, reviewing their past training. However, along with reviewing data and film on the fighters you're training, you also do the same on the opponent. And that fascinated me because I didn't expect that. How much do you delve into a fighter's opponent for a given camp? And furthermore, how much would that piece of the puzzle, does it affect the specific program you have or fighter going into their fight?
Okay, so that's, Jason, that's a great question. I do a lot of that, and some people will say to me, well, Tony, you're nuts. That's not your job. You don't need to be getting involved in that. But I do, because my job, in my opinion, is to make a better fighter. And if just getting that person in better shape makes them a better fighter because it makes them because of better endurance and conditioning, then I'm happy. However, in my eyes and it's not. I'm not the head coach, and I may not have been head skill coach. I may not have been with the fighter for, like Ray Longo has been with Chris Weidman for 8-9 years. He knows his tendencies. He knows some of his strengths. He knows some of his weaknesses. So therefore, I always go to the skill coach and say, how can I help? What do you think the individual needs? What should they be doing? And then the reason why I'll watch the opponent's fighting style. I'll watch what biomotor abilities that they tend to be superior in. Endurance is strength. Therefore, we may need to work on a particular aspect of strength and conditioning and emphasize that. So earlier Phil asked about, periodization models. Well, they're there, and we have wonderful, wonderful models and central tenets of training that are important, but sometimes we have to pick and choose where the emphasis would be. So if you take a fighter as an example, like Wonder Boy, who's a great fighter, well, one of the best kickboxers around, the obvious is he has not been, well, he is now, but until he made his entry, he hadn't done a lot of static strength work. Moving other human beings, lifting heavy weights because of the fact that he was a stand-up fighter. So my point to all this is I do try to take an aggregate of information. You have guys who can punch a hole through the Hoover Dam, but they can do it once, right? Yeah. That's all they can do it. So for me to make them stronger, no matter where we are in the periodization model, is not the priority. Then you have guys who could get in boxing, we'll use it as a more appropriate example, 170 punches around, but they can't knock over a half-empty milk carton. I don't need to work endurance as much with those guys.
Yes.
We need to go to power. So the aggregation of what the skill coach wants, watching film, just helps me maybe change the program a bit. That's all, right? Phil, do you agree, or am I going overboard now?
No, I definitely agree. I'm over here smiling like constantly over here. But like you said, communication is key between skills coaches and strength that need to be addressed as in program. Because, it's the way to do it. Circumstance. So if a fighter needs a certain type of aerobic or needs a certain type of bioenergetic demand or strength increase or something along the lines of that, we got to focus on that primarily to get them better as a fighter, and as an athlete. If we can get them athletically tuned in, then they'll be a better fighter. But definitely makes sense, brother.
Right. Great. Because I don't say this lightly. I mean it seriously. Your lead is something that I go with and follow. So good to know.
Awesome, brother.
Now, followers of MMA will often hear about a fighter never being really 100% going into a fight. The rigors of a training camp can be pretty harsh on the body. How much does a fighter's body being beat up affect your training programs for him or her during a camp? And do you have any specific nightmare stories of injuries really hindering a fighter's program in his camp or her camp?
Yeah, cool question. One guy who's a really good guy, and I've been with him a long time. I can say this, and I mean this. He's a good guy, and that is the All-American, who is a former UFC middleweight champ. And one thing I've always admired about him, guys, he has been banged up bad and never says a word. And we've had several fight camps in which he's hobbling on one leg, and I'm not going to get and I mean that. Yeah. And you don't get into too much detail because then the UFC or whatever, but he's in. We've went into fights with broken cuboid, fractured rib, and so everybody says, well, your fighter wasn't in great condition, they weren't in great shape, and I don't blame them for getting on me for it. What can I say? But what they don't know, and Phil understands this greatly because again, he's in the fight gyms. Is what they're training with would put the average human being in bed for 3 weeks. And so now I've got an entire training camp in which I can't do plyos.
Yes.
I can't jump. I got no power movements left. I got to go to unilateral lightly loaded weight because they can't even do a hex bar deadlift because the bilateral pressure is too much on the foot. I'm limited in my core work because rotation or even anti-rotation is impacting their rib. So that's a lot of these limitations are there, and we don't see them. And when you're a part of that, you really learn in all aspects of sports that, I'm pissed off at the Yankees now because they're tanking. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Hey, I think I got a fellow Yankee fan more than likely there.
Nope, Met fan, unfortunately. So I don't feel bad. I'm suffering much worse than you are right now.
But behind, you got to your point, and a great question, is that, behind the scenes, we have, because the inherent assumption in strength training protocols and periodization models is that they're coming in healthy. And the difference is when you're training Usain Bolt and a sprinter, okay, they get some minor injuries. They do without running at that velocity, but they're not being punched. They're not being kicked. They're not being twisted, and they're not landing on their head. And that we have to approach our sport and our performance training. It really does.
Yeah, every day we have to go around injuries from contact injuries, and my approach and Tony's approach, I'm sure, is to minimize, if not totally just deduct non-contact injuries. So if we can get them stronger, give them a base, and work around these injuries to help them actually get in the cage and fight, then that's a plus on our side. But in the same sense, we still have to work around injuries, still have to be, fundamentally sound in what we do and make sure that we are still progressing each individual without hurting them more. It's the same thing, man. I had to go through this with Mo when he fought Rampage. People are saying, oh, it was a boring fight, this and that. But if people knew exactly what King Mo had to go through, you know what I mean? Like he's good now, he's got his hip fixed and everything is working a little bit better. But we couldn't even run. We couldn't even push a prowler. Wow. We couldn't do any type of plyos. You know what I mean? So there was very limited action going into that fight, and he still worked and did his thing. And so that makes a lot of sense, because what you're saying, I go through on a daily basis, and that's why I have you on my show, brother.
Yeah. No, I know you do. And just a quick note, not to interrupt, but one thing I see you doing, and I wish I, had more time, and which is wonderful, is putting so much emphasis on the corrective side, Phil, and and certainly just trying to make sure we got a good a balanced musculoskeletal system. You're doing really good work on that. That can be a missing piece sometimes. Sometimes it's not intentional with me. I just don't have the time to put as much work into that as I want to, because I barely have the time to get the guy through basic biomotor conditioning abilities,
I hear you.
But it's really cool to see how much effort you're putting into that too.